okay, you're leading up to some sort of tournament or event, and maybe day of, I wouldn't, maybe not day of. I would think, although how would you know your topic in advance? Maybe you do get a day of. And then how much time do you have to research? And then can you write down notes? Is it open book? Do you have to memorize? And then do you have like time allotments to say your points in? And then how do they judge that? How do they like say if you effectively argued something? It's all like subjective. Are there more than one judge?
With debate, there's always this interesting phenomenon where when you tell somebody you're a debater or used to be a debater, they have this instant image of something in their mind. And the rest of the conversation is you having to explain how it's actually much more disappointing than that. Like they're
I thought you
imagining
were saying disciplined. You went disappointing. Wow.
no, just like, oh, so like I'm imagining like an auditorium filled with people and you're up there on a podium and then like, no,
High stakes. You're going to get the girl once you nail this point.
yeah, no, it's a cold concession, right? Like the idea that you didn't
Mhm.
respond to something, so we have to treat it as true.
Silence is consent, as we used to say.
I didn't say that.
But that was the
But
you
I heard it being said and I was like, that's a little yikesy.
Well,
Really
Bex, do you think that we can get them to circle our name?
You know, I'll defend my life choices here.
Yeah.
I mean, I make you do that all the time.
New York is wild. Like the school system here is like
The
nothing
concrete
I've ever.
jungle, baby.
That's what they call it every day outside. We have machetes and everything. No.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast, or welcome to it. I'm your co-host, Rebecca. This is We're Experts Now, and over there, that is
Jackie doing deuces.
Double
For the
deuces.
listeners, there was deuces. I actually don't even know what deuces mean, but I'm pretty sure it's when you throw the peace signs up, right?
Well, because it means two.
Yeah, right?
Put two fingers up.
You know, I was gonna ask a question. I'm not.
Okay.
How you been? What have you been up to?
Oh, good. Wet hair. Don't care. Okay. So I'm just, at least I showered.
Proud of you.
I actually had a fun little experience recently where usually I'm having the amateur alert, but this time I was like a passenger of the amateur alert, and it was kind of nice to see like someone else going through it. I was like just coming back from travel and had been exhausted, and that same night I was like, I still want to see my friends. I got to make the effort. I try to always like yes and adventures, and so we went to go see some late night comedy theater like you do. And I was like, someone's giving me a ride. Just pick me up. I'm barely alive. Pour some alcohol in me and I will, go where we're going. And we got to the theater a little late because that's how we do it in LA. We got, like politely LA late to a live event, which is heinous that we do that in this city. And we're like running to the box office and we wait in the line and we get to the front and they're like, oh, they just started. This is perfect timing. We'll sneak you right in. We've got 3 seats for you. And then they are like, okay, let's see your tickets. Wrong show, wrong theater. So then we run back to the car. We go to the correct theater. Now we're like heinously late. And, we get inside and it's like standing room only. We all find weird like middle row, middle aisle seats. That's not a saying, but just like middle seats in different rows and aisles. We're sitting completely away from each other. And the whole time I was just like, you know what? This is not my business that any of it's going wrong. I'm just here for the ride. And it was great. We saw some wonderful sketch comedy, and it was a sort of murder mystery parody in a Panda Express, and it was gorgeous. And it was like it was fun to be reminded that other people have amateur moments too.
Oh, they all have them. We all have them. I like how you were saying I'm just here for the ride, because that reminds me of like what you were saying in the the Coachella episode of like you're like I'm just like borrowing
Mm.
chapstick my way through. Like that really is the most you, where like I'm anxiously like 20 minutes before, concerned that I'm still late, stressed out that someone saw me and that like I wasn't polite on the way in and that like I have ruined everyone's day. And like you're always like, I'm showing up and it's happening. And I'm like, I need to be like that. I'm always just
I mean, when it's my like sort of obligation and I've like promised to be somewhere, I'm definitely stressing out. Like I'm late, I gotta go fast, I gotta get there. But I was like, look, the stakes are low. We're going to see some funny ha-has. It's not even my friend we're going to support. I'm just there for this adventure. And I try to find those moments and remind myself in those moments, yeah, it doesn't matter. But if it's, business oriented or money obligations or promises, it's like, yeah, you got to show up to things. But if I'm like, yeah, I'm just gonna, this is the adventure tonight.
I, on the other hand, got invited to a Halloween party that starts at dark o'clock, and that just
Oh
nearly sent
yeah.
me into a panic. And I was like, is that like just the sun going down? Is that pitch black? And they're
Mm.
like, it's whatever you want it to mean. And I looked at them, I was like, okay, I'm gonna get blackout drunk and then it'll be dark for me. So
Yeah.
they,
Yeah. Could it
they
be
said that was
emotionally dark?
perfect. Yeah, they said that was perfect. And now I have to, let's be real, we know I'm not gonna get blackout drunk before I go to a party.
I do like
Um
the kind of people that are like, yeah, we can just put a feeling as the
yeah.
time.
It's so cool. Dude, it's so cool. Like when I saw that, like, and it wasn't even a formal invite, it was a message through Instagram. And it was like, come to my party, starts at dark o'clock. And I was like, dude, this is the coolest thing I've ever been invited to. Like, like, right? Like, how trendy are you that you get to say, like, a feeling or like I can't even know how to describe it. Like,
Hmm.
an awareness. It starts at an awareness. That's where it starts, and I have never been aware a day in my life. So
Wow, you really made it to the cool circle.
I'm really not. I was invited one time and I panicked. I'll let you know how it goes.
My cat is
Anyways,
not thriving right now.
oh, mine are just well, actually, okay, wow. I thought it was two of them downstairs, and apparently it's just Odin making all that noise, and
Just
Jupiter
one on
sleeping
overdrive.
quietly.
Oh, of course Droopy is.
Jupiter's a good boy. What are we talking about today, Bex? What is the topic? People want to know, and I'm going to tell them.
Okay, I was gonna
I
say, if you're asking me, I don't know. I cannot help you.
I was trying to remember what we needed to talk about today, and so I was dragging it out, and now I remember. And it's a good topic. Okay, so we're going to talk about debate today. And not like
Oh,
we're
you
going
were
to lose.
debating whether or not to say the topic.
Yeah, because I was like, we might lose some listeners here because like might not everyone find this super fascinating, but I love this topic. For those of you who didn't know, I did debate when I was in community college, all 9 years. Just kidding, I only did it for 2. And then I made like some of the best friends I ever like made there, like just really, really amazing people. This was actually when I was really sick in my 20s and I was really struggling to kind of like figure out what I was doing and my identity. At the time, I had this really great coach, Tony. He was also like had a lot of illnesses as well, and it really helped me navigate what I had gone through. And he died a couple years ago, but we love Tony. And one of the people I met through doing debate is one of the guys that's going to join us on here. His name is Sasan. He is just a brilliant debater. I used to love the juxtaposition between him and his old partner. They were just really great. It did do debate. I definitely did. I was not a bad debater, but I wouldn't say I was a great debater because there's a lot of format to that. And I think we'll have Sasan go through that later on because it's not only has it been a while, or not only was I not great at it, but it's been a very long time since I did debate. But Sasan stuck in it. He has taught debate for many years,
Wow.
coached debate at different places. So super interesting. Bex, do you know anything about debate?
Well, I had a couple thoughts. Hassan is his name.
Sasan with like
Oh,
S-A-N.
Sasan. That's a new
Mhm.
one for me. Well, I'm that's excited to hear he's coaching and teaching as well. And a good coach and teacher like the one that you mentioned, that makes such a world of difference, such an inspiring figures in our formative years. I also love that this is again something where we sort of fall on very different sides of things. So in my high school, debate was lumped with oral interpretation under
Yes.
the umbrella of forensics.
Yes.
And
I
I
did both. I did both sides as well. Mhm.
I did oral interpretation. I was a state champion. I was also in a documentary film they made about oral interpretation. I did humorous and dramatic interpretation. I was all about the saying other people's words, basically. If for those who don't know, oral interpretation, it's a very clunky way of saying it's kind of like acting from a book. Like you just like have your
It's like a
passive,
long monologue. Yeah,
yeah, you
like
have
it's
your
like, well,
monologue
it
or
depends.
scene.
Like poetry
Yeah,
too. Like I
yeah,
used to do
poetry.
program oral interpretation (POI), and you like get to cut up different pieces of work and then like kind of like cut and
Mm.
paste them together and like make it into one piece that flows between them. You have to be able to do different voices, which I was not great at, but I had one god character that I loved, was just very arrogant, and I nailed that one. That was my best piece ever. But yeah, like so you're totally right. There's both sides of that. And like when you talk about speech and debate, that is part of the speech part. There's also
Yeah, for this, it's like the speech part of the spectrum versus the like you get into extemporaneous speaking and
Mhm.
debate and those kind of like, yeah,
Impromptu. That was the one I was
impromptu.
worst at. You got like 3 subjects, you had like 5 minutes, I think, and you had to come up with like one you had to pick one of those subjects and come up with a speech, like just you had 2 minutes to write a speech and then you had to give a 5-minute speech. I hated that. That was like the worst thing ever for me. I did not enjoy. Did you ever do extemporaneous? I never did that. I don't know
Oh,
anyone who did.
no, I never did any of the debate topics at all. Not interested.
So
Our
I did the full
argument, as I
spectrum.
guess it's called.
Yeah, so like I think for us there was like debate, which was like one world, and then there was like speech, which like kind of had like that spectrum that we were just talking about,
Okay.
which like went from like poetry, like prose, which is like a monologue, a 10-minute monologue, POI, which I was talking about, a couple other ones. And then you kind of get into the middle, which is like an informative speech or a persuasive speech. And you're trying to like
Mm.
convince somebody or, inform. And then you get kind of that more debate like, which is impromptu and extemporaneous. Which like all I remember was like extemp was like a 30-minute speach or so. I
Yeah,
forget what it was. It
it's
was something insane, but I never did those, or I did most of those. I did not do extemp. But we're going to be talking about debate. And I don't know why. Actually, I do know why I did a 3.
it went from deuces to trips.
um. So what I was going to is there's 3 types of debate, and this is going to
Mm-hmm.
be pretty much as far as I might be able to explain. But there's parliamentary, which is what I believe I did.
You're like, I think
Policy.
that's what I was doing.
I'm like 98% sure, but a part of me is like, yeah. So it's like parliamentary policy, which was like, I think that you like pick one topic for like the entire year. So into the entire year, we're
Mm.
like, should we develop space? And everyone's just debating that topic on the nuance for like an entire year. Whereas, and then there's Lincoln Douglas, which is like one person and one person debating each other.
Oh, that's kind of
And
what
then
I picture in my head when I think of debate.
Well, and parliamentary is like probably the other one that you would picture in your head as well, which is 2 people on 2 people. You have your like debate
Mm-hmm.
partner, and then like you go up, and I think Lincoln Douglas and parliamentary were very close, but like I only ever did parliamentary. I had a partner. I'm not going
For
to say
some
his name, but
reason,
what?
I'm just thinking of that scene where Lindsay Lohan's like, the limit isn't real, but that's math team, not debate. But
Yeah, I think she was. There's something like, but there's definitely things like that. Like this is going to be so nerdy. Are you ready for it to get real nerdy?
yeah.
So anytime anyone ever mentions the F-35 project to me, do you know what an F-35
This
is?
sounds like a classified document. Is that an X file? Oh, it's an F file,
No, but it
apparently.
is a jet. It's a fighter jet, right? And it is one of the most
Oh.
expensive fighter jets that the US creates. and has. And I'm not going to sit here and say that I know a lot about war or I know a lot about military, but I know a lot about poli science, and I know a lot about budgeting. So
Mm.
anytime someone ever mentions like an F-35, just like offhanded to me, you'll hear me kind of laugh, because when I did debate, anytime I had to come up with a budget, and they would be like, okay, great, you want to influence or you want to implement a welfare system that gives everyone a $30,000 increase a year just for being an American, right? Like that's what I want to do. My, opponents would always be like, "Well, how are you going to fund that?" And I would always be like, "Well, let's defund the F-35 project because we don't need billions of dollars in fighter jets when we don't fight in air combat wars anymore."
Great
So,
point. Great
I
job,
love an
Jackie.
F-35.
But
That's
then how would we get the plot for the next Top Gun movie?
yes, yes, actually yes. But so like a debate, like in my opinion, is a lot of like research. Like I worked in
Yeah.
politics before I went to debate before I went to school. Like I got into politics really young, and then I went to school when I was sick in my 20s. And so I had knew a lot of this like political deep everything piece of knowledge that you have to like everything that's happening in Syria, everything that's happening in Russia, everything that's happening in South America, because you might get a debate topic on it at one point. You have to stay on top of that. That was the only way to be a good debater. And I will say to this day, like, those are the smartest people I have ever met in my life. They
Yeah.
were so brilliant, every single one of them. And I was always just so impressed by the caliber of students a lot of the time, of like having that capacity to like want to solve these problems.
That is great. Yeah, I'm like, I want, if I had kids, I'm like, don't play football, do debate. Like, I want you to be a smarty pants and take some music classes too while you're at it. But I also am like thinking about those types of people who know how to do research and like, what are you tuning into? Do you have Al Jazeera news updates? Do you listen into NPR? Do you have a Substack you go to? Do you like, how do you consume news articles? Because that's what I am always like feeling insecure in my own like news diet of how I receive news, because we don't just have one news channel anymore and we don't just have one newspaper anymore. It's all so like piecemeal, and it's like, how do you figure out the best stream of getting good information?
So I'm not gonna like toot my own horn here, but that was kind of my major in college. Like, well, one of them. But I think that's like it's diversity in all things, right? Like when you are consuming news, the more centered you are with one stream, like the more you are only going to hear an echo chamber and information that might be not like diverse, right? I read every news channel. Like I read everything, and this is why everyone always laughs at me, because I don't know who like a fun bunny is or whoever it is, but
Bad
like
Bunny, Jackie. Mom, you're so embarrassing.
but like I don't know who Fun Bunny is just because I don't like it's not what I'm paying attention to, right? Like I'm reading news sources, and I think that's why when anything's like happening, I'm like, Rebecca, texting you, I'm like, do I like this person? And you're like, no, they were canceled, right? Like I think you just have to be very picky on what you digest, right? Because we can't consume it all. There's too much information out there. And so, like, if you're following certain things, that's the information you're going to have. The other thing to do was have a debate partner that has very different interests than you, right? So, like, I'll be real, the Middle East has always felt really overwhelming to me. And as a white person, I don't really feel like it's my place to make decisions on what's right and wrong. Like, I've never liked international relations when it comes to violence. It's just like I don't like war torn areas. I never have studied that. I really like Renaissance periods and art and all of that. So I would always try to find like a debate partner who knew a lot about the military and like what the wars are happening in the world,
Mm,
and like you would want to find somebody that complements your knowledge, because you've met Carl. Carl was my debate partner. That was my first debate partner. We did it together. And like he was from the military. He was in the army, right? Compared to me, who like knows a lot about like saving people, nonprofits, like, hope efforts, like what we're
mm,
doing with the economy and welfare, places in the world that are doing welfare right. Like our knowledge
yeah.
complemented each other versus two people who are like, oh, let's just light everything on fire, let's do war?
That is like how you pick a trivia team too, of course, when you're going
I
to,
mean,
what is it, Quizzle night or whatever.
trivia night? It's just trivia night? Quizzle night?
I feel like
I
there's
love
like
trivia.
a weird name for some kind of drunk quiz trivia night, but you always got to like, we need someone who's good at pop culture, we need someone who like
Mhm.
knows sports. But
This
where's
is why
debate?
this is why you and I started the podcast. We were saying this off air earlier, is that like your guests are always like way more interested in like being on the podcast because they're entertainment focused. They're like really into that and they love it. Whereas like I have a bunch of people who have like interesting topics sometimes that like are like, I have no interest in coming into the podcast. And I think, but like our topics vary so much. Like, oh my God, I never even knew an intimacy coordinator existed until we
Mhm.
had one on the show, right? And I'm sure you don't know a lot of weathermen, maybe. Like, like it's just
That is fair.
Mhm.
Well, what's not up for debate is, I didn't have anything to go with that, but I just wanted to say that term.
I'm really proud of you. Okay, what do you think? Okay, first, what do you think a debate is like? How do you think that works? Start there.
Yeah. So this is something also, I guess I'm realizing I'm associating it as only something people in school do. It's only something you do on a team in high school or college. Otherwise, you are a politician.
Correct. Yes, you are actually 100 like spot on correct. Or a lawyer, actually. Lawyers are doing
Yeah.
the exact same thing.
Yeah, you're like arguing for or against something. So then I'm like, okay, well, I guess you had mentioned maybe you could pick your own topic, but I'm sort of thinking like, okay, you're leading up to some sort of tournament or event, and maybe day of, I wouldn't, maybe not day of. I would think, although, how would you know your topic in advance? Maybe you do get a day of. And then how much time do you have to research? And then can you write down notes? Is it open book? Do you have to memorize? And then do you have like time allotments to say your points in? And then how do they judge that? How do they like say if you effectively argued something? It's all like subjective. Are
So
there
you
more
are
than one
on
judge?
almost all of that, by the way. Like the type of debate depends on when you get the topic. Like I said, the one has a one like this one topic year round. Parliamentary, you get it. I think it's like 30 minutes or 40 minutes before, and then you're sitting in a room with your like team, right? And so like someone's calling out, like someone's like, "Oh, this is on like the Ukraine, invasion," and right? And somebody in the room knows a lot about Ukraine, and they might just start yelling off facts. You're with your coach, everyone's writing one you're in the same team, you're in the same room with your teammates. Some are negative and some of them are positive. So like, right, like you are, it
On
might
your
be,
own team.
well, because you have your team, like your school team that comes together, right? And
Hmm.
then you and your debate partner debate different people. So depending
Mm.
on the round, people on your team
Oh.
might be debating the opposite, which is helpful because
Oh,
you want
I
to
thought you
know.
were debating like opposing schools.
No, you're debating a different school. So your school, say your
Mm.
school brings 20 people to the tournament, your school of 20 people is split up into 10 teams.
Hmm.
Okay, those 10 teams are playing 10 different schools, and sometimes you play your own team, like your own
Oh.
school, right? But those 10 like you might be like one team every round is affirmative and one team is opposition. So you might be in the same room with your school of different teams, and some of
I
you are
see.
fighting affirmative because like the topics usually like it's like a statement, and I forget, like there was like three categories. I can't remember what it was, but it would be like, we should bring peace to the world, right? And one team saying, yes, we believe peace in the world, this is why we should have peace. And the other team's like, actually, without competition, then there's actually like no improvement in humankind, right? And so that's, you don't know who of your friends from the same school are going to be on which side of the argument. You're just not
Mm.
arguing them in that round.
Right. Okay.
And then there's like a point system, not a point system, there's a debate system. So like it's like Sasan will have to show us, but like you like take notes and you like split it out. I think there's 7 speeches. So like each person speaks at least once, and then like the first speaker and the last speaker of each team goes twice, because you get like a first quick opening speech, another quick opening speech, then like 3 or 4 long speeches, and then 2 closing speeches. So you kind of like switch off. And then like and I can't do this, but like it looks insane when people do it right. I
A
used
flow
I used
chart.
to be able to do it. I need a darker color. So like you have 4 different people speaking, right? So you got to have like 4 different rows. And then you like split it up like this to like rounds. And like you have to talk in the right place. I think I might be doing this wrong. And then you like take notes. And so if like speaker 1 made 1, 2, 3 points, and then speaker 2 drops a point, they used to say silence means consent, but after everything, we don't say that anymore.
Oh
But
my
if you,
God.
it's really bad, I know. But
I
but
mean,
what
but
they're
that is kind of still also the sentiment of like, if you're silent, you're on the side of the opposer. It's like, it's a kind of
so, like
consent.
the argument is that if I was saying we should have peace, and we should have peace because it brings health to humanity and because people are wealthier when they're happy, right? And you have 1 point opposing to me, then you have your point and I have my 2 points. You need to address my 2 points. Otherwise, if you don't, then it's saying that you agree with the point that you didn't mention. That's what the argument is. And so you're trying to see with each argument that person makes, does everyone respond to it and who is right at the end of those arguments? And that's how it's decided. So you can sometimes have a judge that like just disagrees with your argument. They're not supposed to, but it has happened, right? Like, and they're just like, or that they know something that you don't know. Like I lost a round one time, even though like if I had had any other judge, I would have been right. I would have been right. But the judge was a chemist. And I was making an argument that heroin and Oxycontin were the same like molecule essentially. And he was like, no one said anything in the debate that I was wrong, but he was like, yeah, but you're wrong. And I lost because I was technically wrong. So.
I wonder how much more complicated it gets now if there's like any sort of computer fact checking happening.
You're not supposed to have your cell phone in the room, I'm pretty sure, but you're totally right. Like, or do you have AI write you a bunch of points?
Well, I meant more so for the judges to like fact check in real time faster, because I'm thinking like, oh, this chemist is basically like, oh, before we had, not that this was happening before we had the internet, but it's like, you know, the internet is a kind of brain, and without the internet, we're just using human brains. It's just up to what the judge knows. And now I wonder like if there's more judging going on.
It's actually not. It's up to the other team to know that you're wrong. And if the other team doesn't mention that you're wrong, then it's assumed that you're correct, which is like the hard thing about debate.
Oh.
Right? Like think about politics, right? It doesn't matter what is the actual fact. After the debate, if Joe Biden says something about, you know, his opponent, even though it's wrong, we've already heard it. Like that's how things work.
But wait, okay, so then let's go to the other side of that. When you're on the, you know, you and your partner, you're coming with your arguments, you're not supposed to look anything up?
You can look up before, but you cannot during the round. No,
not
you
during,
can only go in with the notes that you took, and you can't have like notebooks. You can have like, you know, like obviously what you would normally. I think you have to be able to bring notes,
right? Like some note cards with the.
I'm pretty sure you can bring notes, but you can't bring, like, you can't be on your phone. You can't be like looking up through like a notebook. Like you have to like because you have to have your argument structured. Yeah. So.
But now I do wonder, like,
write it.
Could you get ChatGPT to run through a few things just so you can like.
That's what I'm saying.
It up?
Yeah. Yeah. Like, cause you could just be like, ChatGPT, what are the 3 arguments that like we should have world peace? Right. Like, that's a really interesting point. I don't know. It's been a long time since I debated. I loved it. I'm so glad we're jumping into this topic. And I will say that like Sasan was probably one of the most eloquent speakers that like I ever saw debate. It was really interesting because like his partner was definitely like a bull in a china shop, like forcing my point across. Like he was like kind of like, and then Sasan said significantly less words, but like just had this very charismatic way of speaking. So I always really enjoyed watching him debate, as well as his partner. They were really, really a great team. And then I loved it so much. So I'm glad we're diving into this topic.
Yeah, maybe he can give us some pointers on how everyday people can get their point across. That would be my bare minimum takeaway. But I'm excited to dive into the world of debate and find out from a true pro.
Let's go debate.
Let's debate it.
Welcome back from the break, everyone. We've been getting settled in for the debate. Who is more right, Rebecca or myself? I'm hoping it's me as usual. Just kidding. Just kidding. Well, welcome to another part two. We have a new friend here, Sasan. We used to be on the debate team together, but I can kind of have you explain the rest of your experience in the debate. You definitely went way farther than I did. So, yeah, tell us about yourself.
Hi, thanks for having me. Yeah, my name is Sasan. I currently work for a nonprofit called the Brooklyn Debate League. We're in Brooklyn, New York, and we do a lot of things, but the short version of it is we help high schools that want speech and debate programs build speech and debate programs. So a lot of what I do is I go to schools and I still teach kids occasionally, but right now I'm mostly like training high school teachers to become debate coaches because they already have a relationship with the students, they're already at the school, and we're just trying to get as many teams started as possible. So that's mostly what I do. Before that, I was over at DVC, Diablo Valley College, where Jackie and I went to
Whoop,
school,
whoop.
and I was coaching their debate team for a long time, that like 8 years, something like that.
Go
Um,
Fighting Devils, I'm guessing.
Vikings.
Vikings,
It doesn't
okay.
make any sense. You'd think it'd be like a devil thing.
No,
Um,
we're Vikings, Rebecca,
Okay,
obviously.
yeah, Devil Vikings.
but yeah, that's I also have a YouTube channel where with my friend Paul, we like it's an equity project. We like put free resources out there for debate. So
Wow, okay.
yeah,
Didn't
it's
know
very
that.
I know, which is why I have like a microphone and stuff like that. But it's
Makes sense.
very like inside baseball, I guess is a term. I don't know enough about baseball to really know what that term means.
The term inside baseball is too inside baseball. Yeah.
Yeah, it's yes, exactly.
Esports
So
ball really hard over here, so we really get that reference.
Oh, yeah.
right, great. I should have used something else, but I can't think of any. But yeah, so a lot of it's not like general audience facing. So I'm excited to talk about debate and explain it and have my expertise mean something.
I
Yeah, I
already
mean,
have a question.
oh.
Are the people that you're teaching, are they old debaters, or are you having to teach these new high school coaches or whatever, like debate from the start?
That's a great question. The occasionally you'll have an old debater, but the vast majority of the people we work with are just passionate English teachers, history teachers, and they've kind of heard of debate, and the school is interested in doing it. So after school programs pretty much ended in New York during the pandemic,
Yeah,
and New York is wild. Like the school system here is like
the
nothing I've
concrete
ever.
jungle, baby.
That's what they call it every day outside. We have machetes and everything. No, there's
Jackie's
one
triggered.
there's 1 million. Oh, okay. I thought I was. There's 1 million like high school students, like public school students in New York. So it's wild. Like
That's too many
where
kids. I'm gonna be real. That's like
Yeah,
that's
what do you
that's
do with them?
900,000 too many kids.
Yeah, right. So part of what they're trying to do is figure out like, okay, let's figure out something for 1 million kids to do. So, um,
Well, you would
deb-
think too that some of debate would be like there's parts of it we already know, I imagine, right? Like it's a kind of critical thinking and a kind of
Mhm.
argumentative process. So hopefully with teachers there would be, like you're saying, some like kind of core nugget that already exists to like build on to just get them to the actual formalized structure.
Yeah, it's really interesting because um, I think a lot and I work a lot and I talk a lot about like the way the debate events themselves are designed. And with debate, there's always this interesting phenomenon where when you tell somebody you're a debater or used to be a debater, they have this instant image of something in their mind, and the rest of the conversation is you having to explain how it's actually much more disappointing than that. Like they're
I thought you
imagining
were saying disciplined. You went disappointing. Wow.
no, just it like, oh, so like I'm imagining like an auditorium filled with people, and you're up there on a podium, and then like no,
High
it's
stakes. You're gonna get the girl once you nail this point.
yeah, no, it's a high school classroom with you, two other people you're debating, and like one hungover judge who's um
You're
but it is
totally right, but I never thought about it. Like now that I'm older and like of the age that a lot of the judges were, they totally
yeah,
probably were hungover.
Yeah, you're
oh,
staking your whole
totally.
worth, intellectual worth. You're like, I'm gonna make this argument. The judge is like, yeah, kid, come on, we end this run on sentence.
So, and I mean, I'm sure that's the way it is with like when you're getting into chess competitions and stuff like that, right? Yeah, at the highest level, when you're at a state or national championship and it's the final round, yes, there's a big audience. But for most people, the majority of the way you interact with it is really removed from the sort of mental image I think a lot of people have of like debating.
Yeah, it's
Um,
like maybe 6 people in a room, and that's because your friend has a buy around, and they're just like there to see like what you say, right?
yeah.
They're like, "Are you gonna fail? I'm gonna laugh if you fail." Like
Yeah, and
I think
also
it is.
like I imagine the people who do debate are like the, Goodwill Hunting scene in the bar where people are just quoting full paragraphs of, literature to each other.
It's mostly people who are nervous. Like it's mostly just kids, like whether I by kid I mean like a college kid or like a high school kid, but usually they have some interest in being heard and having an opinion on things. And I think that does sort of self-select for a certain kind of student, but it's really a pretty wide range of just regular high school students who don't have other after school programs that they're already super invested in, so not necessarily like athlete types, not necessarily there's some like you did OI,
Hmm. Hmm.
there's some like drama kid like
Yes.
Venn diagram situation going on, but
We were the
The alternative
troublemakers.
kids. Yeah, the alternative kids, like the debaters and I feel like the drama kids can't hang out. It's
We
where
were
they
the
meet.
ones
yeah.
smuggling the paraphernalia to the conferences, the conventions.
Yeah, you guys were a lot more fun to hang out with. But yeah, it's all sorts of kids. But yeah, you I think that's true of anything, that when you imagine what it's like, you kind of imagine the most experienced high level people at the kind of like peak stakes. But yeah, what's interesting about it is, the vast majority of the experience is like bad bagels and like just
Waking
rolling
up
up
at
to a
6
hotel.
a.m.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like
like
Yeah.
we got to drive to Santa
Pantyhose.
Rosa. Yeah, yeah, yep.
yes. I think it's like you and I were talking about this earlier, like just like that time in my life was a particularly bad time. Like I was struggling with so many health problems, and like I look back at that time, like debate was like everything. Like debate, it was so much fun. Like I think when you said people who want to be heard, I think that resonated with me, right? Like I had my voice taken away from me, a really bad relationship as well, and I found this community of people who like support you being heard as well, like right, like let me find a way for you to tell your story through poetry, or maybe your story is yelling at somebody in a debate room, like right, like it just getting your point across and being right sometimes. Like I think it's also the most intellectually stimulating part of my point of my life, with the exception of kind of one of the companies I've worked with in the last couple of years, of just being with a lot of very smart scientists, right? Like it's so, if you're an intellectual, it is like, I don't know, it is like sports. Like it is like it's like going out and like throwing the ball with your friend. It's like talking about the nuances of like international politics was super fun to me. So I think it's such a unique experience. I think for kids who, yeah, I imagine in especially like smaller rural areas that don't have access to a lot of things like this, is
Yeah.
fascinating and exciting.
Yeah, and I mean it's also really interesting because I grew up in the suburbs of, the East Bay. But now being in Brooklyn and working with like Title I schools and just like low income students, it's really interesting seeing them realize they have an interest in these things and seeing them start to have those conversations with each other on the bus ride home. Yeah, it's great. And I mean, I have a wild story to put that exact sentiment into context. So I mentioned I work for the Brooklyn Debate League. There was, do you guys know Humans of New York?
Yes, Honey, we love.
Yeah, so there was a Humans of New York story about the co-founders of the nonprofit that I work for. And the way the nonprofit started was that they had this really inspiring Humans of New York story that brought in enough donation money for them to
Oh.
make the nonprofit. I met the guy who um, is now my boss like a week before the Humans of New York story dropped. And he was like, if we manage to get some money, I'd like to hire you. And I like the most freak random thing. But his story is that he went to high school at a high school in New York called Stuyvesant. It's like a very elite public school. You have to test to get in there. But it is like a block and a half from the Twin Towers. And like he was like a junior in high school when like the September 11th attacks happened. And if you've been like a block and a half away, it's like you're right there. Like it's massive buildings, right? And there was actually a documentary that I saw a trailer for online about the kids that went to that school at that time. I
Oh.
don't know if my boss even knows that. Maybe he's in it. I don't know, but he told me that he went home after that happened, and his parents were just like, "You good?" And he was like, yeah, and just never talked about it again. And like in school, all of New York, just no one was talking about it, and he was going crazy. He's like, the scariest, craziest thing that has ever happened just happened, and no one's talking about it. And for him, he did extemp, but the way it is when we're talking about like people wanting to be heard, for him this was an activity where you went and you talked about current events, and that was the most current event thing, and you just got to talk about this thing that no one is talking about. And I think that draws a lot of people to it, whether they have a personal connection to the issues being talked about or whether they're like learning about it for the first time and developing um, like a sense of concern about these world issues. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think everybody finds the thing that they wish more people were talking about, and that's what
Mhm.
kind of draws them in a lot of the time.
I
Yeah.
think also that like really magical moment of like in the process of wrestling with something. I know like I've kind of discovered recently that's what I gravitate towards in comedy too, like in stand up. Like what are maybe people are putting a comedic twist on it, but it's really when it comes down to it the uh, issues that you're wrestling with as a person having to deal with something and not even necessarily having the answer in that moment, but like taking something apart and looking at it, and it kind of can be stabilizing to, like you're saying, when you go through these huge experiences, to like look at it and say like, oh yeah, this is actually not just something inside my head. This is a shared, can be a shared lived experience. And yeah, it's a powerful moment.
Yeah, that's a really poignant comparison. I've well, first I've heard comedians give the advice of you should talk about the things that make you angry. You don't
Mhm.
necessarily have to be angry about them when you're talking about them, right? But that's kind of what you're talking about. Like the things you're kind of wrestling with are um, the most fertile ground for you to be like exploring through talking, art, expression, whatever. And yeah, I've also heard a lot of writers talk about that the purpose in what you're doing is kind of like making a thing, and then you show it to someone and they're like, oh, I kind of have that, like, and you kind of like make the connection. And I think there's all sorts of ways of exploring that. I think speech and debate is one of them. I think the perception of debate that I don't know that it's fully inaccurate, but it's certainly not what draws me to it, and it's something that I don't like to model, is this idea of somebody who just kind of is a slick talker and is good at lying and
See,
like
that's not what I see at all. Like, see, I'm
right.
like
Well,
a
'cause
kid
you've
with
seen it up close.
suspenders. Yeah, like a pocket protector,
Yeah.
like those are the kids that I think of.
Well, and I also don't think the world needs more of that. Like I don't know what the benefit of someone like pretending to believe something they don't is, right? So when I teach, I try to encourage kids not to just be like devil's advocate or like whatever, like the people who sit outside with tables that are like
Change my mind.
change my mind, and it's like you just want to argue with people, and
Yeah.
that is
That is
I don't know,
definitely
that's
a personality that it gravitates towards debate, and there's a lot of
y-
people who just want to argue.
Yeah, they want
yes.
to be the only person in the room talking. It's like,
And
well,
those people don't tend to do well. You get a lot of that at when you're working at a middle class community college in the suburbs. A lot of like young Republican types are like watching a lot of people like doing these like change my mind videos, so they join the debate team. And eventually I started just being like, look, if you're here for me to tell you how good you already are at debate, 3 out of 10. That is how good you are. Like if you want to be better, like I can teach you, but if you're not interested in
get out of
like you're
my
not
classroom.
well, I mean, that's kind of what it is, like people think they're going to show up and get to show off how smart
Yeah.
they are, but it's difficult for everybody when you're starting out, and if you're willing to potentially it's humbling, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And a lot of people are looking for exactly the opposite experience. They're going there to talk at people and not
Yeah.
talk to people. And I don't think that makes for I don't think those people have a very long career in debate.
No. Talking about debate, though, can we take a step back and tell us what the types of debate are?
Yeah.
There's so many types of debate. So
I'd
and
like
that
to
is
debate that.
it's unique to the United States. Most countries in the world
Oh.
have debate formats, and most of those countries have one debate format, with some exception. But in the United States, for a long list of reasons, which we might talk about later, um, the pool of students who do debate has gotten like subdivided and subdivided many times over, which is an interesting problem because now the overall number of kids doing it has shrunk to where we have to start trying to combine stuff again, but people are very like set in their ways and not liking the other style of debate. So the short answer is that there's a lot. At our college, at the college level, there is parliamentary debate, NPDA style specifically. There is policy debate. There is now a new one called IPDA. There's Lincoln Douglas, but there's at least a dozen other ones that we didn't do. And so you hadn't heard of them.
I was an elitist here. I just thought that what we were doing was what was everyone was doing. I didn't
and
even open my eyes.
and the interesting thing is that but that's true of everybody, right?
Okay.
Like there's no central organization that has all the data on like everyone who's doing debate, what kind of debate they're doing. Like it springs up in so many different forms in different places that just the question of how many debate formats are there is a question that I don't think anyone knows the answer to. Like it's somewhere between 20 and 40. But
What's the
Wow.
most popular or like
at the high
used?
school level, So the oldest format of debate, the one that just used to be called debate and everything else sort of sprang forth from it, is now called policy debate. Policy debate goes back to the 1800s. There's records of the debates. There's you can read full transcripts of the national championship rounds from
Whoa.
the 40s, 50s, 60s. I've done that. It's weird. And people have done like studies on it and how it's changed over time, which is dramatically. Which I'm sure we'll also talk about. But the most popular format of debate currently is a high school format called public forum. Most debate formats are designed to model something. So, for example, there's one called Congress, and the topics you talk about are the laws that Congress is debating, and you pretend you're a senator, and the format is very much based on, it's sort of like Model UN, right? Where
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
role playing a bit. The Lincoln Douglas is modeled after the debates that Abraham Lincoln and Christopher Charles Douglas. I should know this.
You know,
Mike.
Not Frederick
Definitely
Douglas.
Mike.
Not Frederick.
Yeah, Mike Douglas. Yeah,
I
Michael
want to
Douglas.
see the
Um,
Nixon Kennedy debates style.
Right. So interestingly enough, the current most popular debate format is called public forum, but the thing that it was modeled after was the Stephen Douglas. Yeah.
Okay. You go,
The
Stephen.
current most popular debate format was modeled after the early 2000s CNN show Crossfire, which got canceled because it was terrible. It was a terrible format for discourse. But it is, yes, that is.
But they were like, you know what? That's what's good enough for our high schoolers. All right.
Yeah, well, I think like Ted Turner like donated like millions of dollars or something and was like, make it happen. And now
love
it
that for
like
him.
Was that the
exists.
first Crossfire host? I'm terrible at my news
I think he's
pundits.
like the owner of CNN. I'm not sure.
Ted Turner owns like all of Turner Media and like CNN, everything that's in like that whole
Goes
umbrella.
all the way to the
Yeah.
top. It always
Yeah,
does.
he's one of those like people have conspiracy theories about him types. Yeah.
Okay.
They're all true. Just saying.
Yeah. But I hope that was a long answer to a short question of what are all the debate formats.
Okay, the one we did was parliamentary.
Yeah.
That was, you had two partners, op and neg.
Mhm.
Nope, that's the same thing.
That's the same thing. Affirmative, negative, pro con.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Everyone had names,
Mhm.
though. What were their names?
So yeah, parliamentary debate. There's actually many different forms of parliamentary, which I
Of
also
course.
learned later. There's like British parliamentary, there's APDA, NPDA. It's messy, but all of them have the connection that they're based on like British Parliament. So the speakers are the Prime Minister and the member of government on the affirmative. And on the other side, yeah, it's the leader of opposition and the member of the opposition. So
okay, that was like driving me nuts on like trying to remember what those people's names were, because I was like, they all had names, and then like
little code names. Love a code name.
Yeah, and there's like little traditions that each, because the different formats are modeling different stuff, there's like little traditions in Parley that existed when you and I were doing it. Like I don't know if you remember the knocking like you would do. Like if you agreed with something someone, yeah. So if somebody makes a good point, you like knock on the
like
table.
Snaps in poetry.
Yes, it's exactly like snaps in poetry, but that has largely died out because I don't know if it's the internet or just the increasing interconnectedness of things, but the various debate formats and styles are sort of starting to like homogenize, and the differences between them are starting to mean less and less. So there's a lot of people who do Parley now, but I don't know if they still use terms like prime minister or member of government.
Who were the speed debaters? Because those guys were assholes.
Speed debaters.
I
Yeah.
hated
So
those guys. You were the anti-speed debater. Someone would go up against you and
yeah.
have like 45 points, and you would be like, in point 7 through 9, I have this response, and you would just
Yeah.
destroy them. But speed debaters were the worst.
Yeah. So you guys were talking earlier about the idea of a cold concession, right? Like the idea that you didn't
Mhm.
respond to something, so we have to treat it as true.
Silence is consent, as we used to say.
I didn't say that.
But that was the
But
term we used.
I heard it being said, and I was like, that's a little yikesy. But yeah, so how that generally developed over time, and you can look at the records of how the national championship final round changed from the 40s to the 50s to the 60s. Gradually, the debate started to get faster, and people have different narratives around how or why. But I think of it in terms of just like what is the design of the game rewarding, and people are just going to do the thing that the game is rewarding. So if I say something and you not responding to it helps me just automatically win the debate, it behooves me to say more things than you're able to respond to. Now obviously, like, you're not going to be able to keep up with someone talking like an auctioneer, but you might be able to keep up with somebody talking faster than conversational. And you become a debater and you debate faster than conversational. And then when you're a judge, if somebody's talking that fast, you can kind of keep up with it. And then those debaters get faster and they become judges, and it kind of like escalates, right? So it's reached a point where in some formats of debate, it's become completely incomprehensible to the general public.
Yeah.
And I mean
Which
completely.
should count against you, because it's like, well,
Yeah.
that now your argument is suffering.
It should count against you, but it's hard to systematize a set of rules for how it will count against you.
Some judges were just cool, and they would be like, yeah, I didn't hear your other points, they didn't make sense, and would just be that. Like, those were my favorite judges, because I
Yeah.
remember my first round against a speed debater, and like I literally wrote down like 2 words and was like,
Mhm.
all right.
Well, it harkens back to my acting school training, where everyone, when you come in freshman year, there's this like weight on everyone to get your first cry. You need to be able to cry in a scene, in a class, and that's your huge focus. And then by your sophomore year, you learn that acting is not just crying. Acting is crying and being heard. That is a part of it. You can't just cry for yourself. You have to share it and still be able to be intelligible. And, you can't just debate in with your own head. You gotta.
Yeah. Well, it's a interesting and messy and complicated history. Just to get into the messiness of it a little bit, right? There's a lot of like, okay, yeah, you have to be heard, you have to be like, presentational to an audience. It's a communication event. But then you go back to like debate in the 50s and 60s, and how like marginalized people were like kept out of certain spaces. And in the 70s and 80s, those groups started to do well in debate, but they did it by subverting the rules and by like breaking the rules, because the way they frame it is, if you are the one, like, we are not the ones that determine what a polite professional presentational thing is. And if rich white people are determining that, it's always going to give an advantage to rich white people. And the argument has been that by like not technically breaking the rules, but like doing these strategies, they're like subverting a like a space that wouldn't otherwise allow them to succeed. But it also does have drawbacks. So in the 90s, the debate in like urban areas was much more popular and doing well and doing like a lot of good for like young urban youth, but a lot of that has kind of dried up as the debates just are unintelligible, like unpleasant, like mean and fast, and it just hurt the activity in the long run. And so it is like a little more uh complicated. Right now I'm trying to, like I mentioned before, like we have to get the groups that are um all about being fast and technical and you know unintelligible, and the people who think like this is a communication event, like we should be talking and presenting and being persuasive. Like I literally, part of what I'm trying to do right now in debate with the small platform I have is figure out how to keep both of these groups happy. It's really hard. They really don't like each other.
You'd think
I
there'd be more across the aisle, helping each
Yeah.
other, but
But I think they have different interests, right? Like they're both coming to the practice for a different reason. Like it's like when I play board games with people who are really competitive, I absolutely hate it. Like I think probably both of you know I'm not a competitive person. Like I never really cared about winning. I was always there to like do it for an enjoyment because I like doing things. But like you put me with a group of like really competitive people, and this is gonna like tie back to like another question I had, which was like there was a group of technical people that as I got farther in that I could never figure out, and there was like a T and a
Hmm.
K or some
Hmm.
other letters that people would always run on me, which was like an
Yeah.
argument to my argument or something
Hmm.
that confused the crap out of me as well. And I think I was one of those people that was there for the enjoyment, but it gave me a place to have a voice, and I um, always hated
Yeah.
it against those
I-
people.
I- and part of the benefit of debate being as like splintered as it was is there was something for everyone. Yeah, occasionally you go to a competition and somebody is like debating in a way that doesn't gel with what you want. But broadly speaking, if you were a high school debate coach, you would pick a format that is as competitively oriented as you want your program to be. You go to competitions where people who have similar mindsets are going to, and you have the experience you want. And now, as post pandemic, we're trying to like get everything back together. The issue is that like you just, people have to share those spaces a lot more than they had to before. And but yeah, so you wanted to know about those
Yeah, what were
arguments,
the
like
letters?
yeah, there's a lot of letters. The ones that you were
this
thinking
is
of
just
are
sounding like Harry Potter to me. People just like
it
doing incantations at you, like a TI, I
that is
cast on you.
exactly what it is. Yes. And there is a lot of jargon that is just like shorthand for a longer concept. So you'll use like one word or like one letter from that word as a shorthand for like a 3 sentence concept. Um, but what then also happens is a lot of people like learn the letters but don't fully understand the concept. um well, right, but a lot of people who are even like out there like doing these things, and so then it becomes really confusing because you're on the receiving end and they don't understand what they're saying and you're trying to figure out what they're saying. So the I can summarize it in this way. So debate has judges, but it doesn't have referees. A judge just picks a winner at the end, but there's no moderator exactly. So it's up to the debaters to kind of moderate the debate themselves. So there is one layer of the debate where you're talking about the topic. The United States should invest in high speed trains, right? Um, and then there's the other layer of the debate where you're talking about the debate itself. Like, does the thing that they said they want to invest in count as a high speed train? Is it cheating for them to talk about this thing that is like not exactly a high speed train in order to give them an advantage in the debate, right? Or let's say Jackie's in a debate and somebody's talking way too fast. And you're like, that doesn't seem cool. That's not fair. So we call those arguments procedural arguments. The most common one is the T stands for topicality, which is like the thing that you're talking about isn't the topic that we should be talking about. And it's technical, but it has a set structure that people expect. And so you kind of just are, it's sort of like looking at forms that you know what you're looking for. You're not like reading you're not listening to every part of it. A lot of it is just sort of, uh,
Fluff.
yeah, it's not fluff exactly, but it's like I'm saying this just to have said it, but we say this like, for example, every time you make a procedural argument, you say that it's important for reasons of fairness and education, right? That's like why I'm saying it, right? But that part, like I'm tuning that out. It's if they don't say it, that's a problem. But the difference between one topicality argument and another topicality argument isn't that. So I'm not mentally processing that. What I'm focusing on is like, what is the exact word you think I'm misinterpreting? What do you think the proper interpretation of that is? And why is your interpretation better than my interpretation? So that is how a topicality works.
And we had to give definitions all the time, and I totally like you just like triggered a memory for me that like we had to be like, I'm defining high-speed trains as like any type of transportation that moves quickly that is on a rail, right? Like so that could mean other things that are not a train, but yeah.
There was a debate about regulating banks. This is when I was judging, and the first team comes up and they're talking about like otters. And the negative team was like, yeah, like otters?
Riverbanks?
Then they had that moment, and then they were like, wait, do you mean riverbanks? And they're like, yeah, we're regulating banks. And so they go up and they make the argument, they read a topicality, and they're like, banks means like a financial institution. And their reasoning, right? Because you have to give a reason. Why is that a better interpretation? Was the dictionary. If you check the dictionary, bank will be a financial institution. And the other team came up and they said, we did check the dictionary. The first definition of bank is riverbank.
Yeah.
We already checked.
So like that kind of stuff happens, and it's, like you start to enjoy that aspect of the game also in some ways. Like, yeah, did we talk about regulating the financial institutions? Like, not really, but we'll also probably eventually talk about that.
That's epic. I'm sorry. That is really epic.
I am curious about the topics. So the topics would be chosen by the judges at these conferences if you're doing a conference circuit?
Yeah, well, yeah, we call them tournaments.
Tournaments.
But, the people who put together the specific tournament will choose the topic. So if I'm hosting a tournament and people are coming to my school, I'm writing a bunch of questions for extemp speakers to answer, and I'm writing a bunch of resolutions, debate topics for the debaters. Some debate formats, like Jackie mentioned, have a set topic for a whole year. But that is also, that's like kind of voted on by the people who do that activity over the summer. But in formats of debate where each round has a different topic, you are finding that out as a surprise. The tournament has prepared 7-8 topics, and then you go into a room where you and all your teammates are sitting. You know that in 20 minutes, you're all going to split up and go into various different classrooms at this college to have debates. But all of those debates will be on the same topic, and you prepare together as a group before you splinter off and have your own individual debates against individual opponents from other schools.
Yeah, because I'm curious about like if these are happening in different cities, how different kind of student populations respond to topics, and like if someone in the Midwest has just a totally different experience than someone on the West or East Coast.
It's a wildly different experience in a way that a lot of people don't expect or realize. And one of the things that I found is, growing up in the suburbs, you talk about a lot of things that people in cities live through. And
Yeah.
when we take kids from cities to even like within New York, but with like class differences, like economic differences, they will be in these debates where kids are talking about their lives and their families, what just completely innocently. Like, I don't blame them. They're like, what does a 15-year-old kid know about like the crack epidemic? But like, I know coaches who were doing debate in the doing debate in the early 2000s, and they're like, my parents are addicted to like crack. Like, you're talking about my life in a way. I've we've had students who had to debate about like immigration policies and deportation when they were undocumented and their family was like getting uh deported. And so I think the biggest difference between how people in different areas interact with these topics, the topics themselves don't vary so much. There is some regionalization of stuff, but the biggest difference is the perspective that they bring in, because a lot of places you talk about welfare issues because it is a concept that you've heard of. It is a problem that we have to address in society, and what's the best solution. And other people have the perspective of like, I'm going to go home and I don't know if there's food there. And it's a wildly different how they talk about it. It's just is a lot different to me, living in New York now and working with the students that I do. And when we travel them to a big competition that has kids fly in from all over, they have a little bit of a, uh, you know, fish out of water experience. It's a little weird for them, and it's weird for the other students because it's like a character from a book you were reading came out and is talking to you. It's like, oh my god, you are the person that this debate topic was about. Like,
Oh, your case study 476. Nice to
yeah,
meet you.
exactly. There's one of the topics. So we went to a national championship in Louisville. I think you guys were talking
Oh,
about
yeah,
that.
yeah, we've been
That
there.
was last that was in May of last year. And the topic that they were discussing was academic tracking, which is just, students get placed in more remedial or more advanced classes based on some perception. Maybe that's like a set testing system, maybe it's just teachers recommend it, but it's the idea that students get separated out into groups based on whatever. And I guess that existed at the schools that I went to, and I'm not really aware of it. I didn't really think about it, but the kids that I was teaching, it was the first topic that we were talking about where they were like, I have really strong feelings about this. And they had to prepare both sides of the debate, but
Yeah.
they were kids that got held back, or their school wanted to put them in like special ed, but then they were like valedictorian later, and they're like
Yep.
thinking about the ways in which their race like influenced that perception of them when they were kids. And it can be, yeah, like topics that, and I'm sure there's rural topics that we talk about all the time and they come and go and we don't think about them, which in rural communities are, like life
Daylight
and death
savings
topics.
times. When are we going to get rid of it?
Yeah, yeah,
John Deere
yeah.
tractors. We
I mean,
debated those
these
a
are,
lot.
yeah, these are real things. So the topics themselves tend to be just things you might hear about in the news around the country, but how the actual discussions happen, I think, is where it's the broadest range of experiences.
That's a lot. I
Yeah,
never
I
really
know.
thought about
Yeah,
like
sorry, I'm
How are
like,
we going to wrap? I'm like,
like
how are
no, you
we
guys are
going?
like, let's talk about debate, and I'm like, listen, kids that I work with.
let's fix these problems, Rebecca. Let's take
All
on the
right,
world.
let's solve
Um
debate.
so yeah, I think that's like a lot to think about. I mean, I remember like myself, like a lot of topics. Like we were debating a lot of like Ray Rice in the NFL, like what the NFL should have done when I had experienced domestic violence, right? Like I remember towards the end of debate, one of the reasons, not debate, towards the end of my experience in debate, there was in interpretation of literature, there was a ton of people talking about their experience as a Black person or a person of color, and that was when like kind of Black Lives Matter was really like popping off, and like there was a lot of conversations being had, and that kind of identity of different experiences. I do think that I have a different life. I've had a lot of trauma, but I grew up in a predominantly white area. That was one of like my not first experiences, but really pivotal moments of understanding, hearing a lot of people's like interpretation of literature and their summations of their experiences. And I think in the interpretation of literature scene, there was a lot of people being very self-expressive. Um, so yeah, like I think it does change, and it gives you access to people who have a different mindset and like an opportunity to have a conversation that really opens up a lot of people's eyes. And I think a lot of people who are in debate who want to be like the upper middle class people who maybe want to be more technical, it is really helpful to sit down and have those conversations and to try and learn, because you also are told to like sit and listen, right? Like you need to sit there and shut up when it's not your turn. And then like you learn rejection as well, like, right? Like when you're not right, and you really think you're right and you lose a round, that sucks, and you have to learn to deal with it and act
Yeah.
professional.
Well, yeah, I think you put that really well. I teach people that the most important skill in debate is listening. Debate is, you talk and you argue in essays, in every speech, you're making arguments, right? But specifically debate is like introducing this concept of competitive listening, that if Jackie and I are in a debate and she is saying something to you, Rebecca, the judge, I have to, it's not just about what I want to say. I have to be conscious of what you're hearing, how that makes you feel, whether that is persuasive to you. And I have to understand and respect that. Jackie was talking about like, well, you think you're right and it turns out that you're wrong. Sometimes you are right, and the judge just doesn't see it that way. But ultimately, the goal is to get this person to vote for you. The goal is not, you can have your own personal goal, right? But the activity, the win condition, right, is getting the judge to circle your name. And it is an exercise in like empathy and in like listening and caring about what a person's values are outside of what you think they should be. Just sort of, this is how this person will make this decision. And can I interact with that in a way that is persuasive to them, rather than, well, this is what I think and I know I'm right. It just doesn't get you that far in debate. The last debate round I was ever in, I was right about something, and my judge didn't think so and voted me down because they're like, what you said about, like, it was a topic about North Korea, and I had said something about it, and they're like, that's not true at all, and that's just like, bullshit people make up, and that's not true. And I was like, okay, that's fine. Here's like 8 citations, like a book I just read about this, but the game is like, get this person to vote for you. And I think that is a exercise in like empathy and thinking about another person's perspective that you don't necessarily get from just learning to write an essay, because it's not really centered around the person who's receiving the information.
Well, Bex, do you think that we can get them to circle our name?
I'll defend my life choices here.
Yeah.
I might make you do that all the time.
If you guys are gonna do some sort of debate, I could get you ready for it.
We're not going to debate. We are not going to debate.
But
we
good
also
to know.
learned today. And you did get me ready for it. I think the first year we were on the same team, and then after that you were coaching. It was very clear that you were better than the rest of us. But I remember you competing with Paul, who is your cohort. So
yes.
Okay, well, I think
yeah. You can go for it.
Oh no,
go ahead. I mean, I was just, even from like the very beginning of when we started talking, something that came up that I noticed is kind of recurring trend in all these topics is you were talking about sort of this like database that you kind of have collected just for fun of resources, and I feel
Hmm.
like there's always something like that when you're getting into some, like if you were someone who was trying to approach this as something new to do, of like, where do you get started and plugged in, and how do you start preparing yourself, and is usually just people who are doing that thing, and you start with like those sort of community level resources. But on the more like towards the structure, the like fully structured version, I'm sort of trying to extrapolate the like why of debate. And like you saying, it's not just about writing better essays. I'm hearing a lot of things of like, it's about defining, defending your conclusions, but also how did you get there? And ultimately, like, how are you actively engaging in your civic experience as someone like who is going to be experiencing society, but also being part of society. And it is the listening, it is the responding, it's both of those things. But it just, in debate, then it is also, are you going to win the argument?
I think yes, and what you're making me think about is just sort of like, what is the skill set and how do I teach people to be good debaters, right? And I think the reason I do what I do is because I think those skill sets are also just useful things for a human being to do. So strategically, the most effective way to become a good debater without having to talk super fast and cheat. Um,
Oh yeah, talk really fast
um,
and cheat when you can.
yeah. um, it is two things, right? In terms of like being informed, what sort of how would I tell a student to be informed? Well, there's two layers to it. The first is most debates ultimately become about the same few sets of issues in the end. Because whatever you're talking about in a debate, you have to justify its importance. Uh, Jackie will remember the term impact, right? Every argument needs to have some sort of impact because at the end of the day, people know how to Google things. And people think that what I do is I try to disprove everything my opponent is saying. Like, I can't disprove it. What they're saying is probably true. Like, they Googled it. The New York Times agrees. I'm not getting up there and like coming up with like a magical way of making someone not believe that's true. What I'm doing is I'm presenting a different side of the issue and just explaining why that other side of it is more important. So our arguments have like this quality of whether they're true and we have whether they're important. And when you have to explain why something is important, you ultimately lead to the same few ideals or values or concepts, right? Um, so for example, if you're telling a kid who thinks the school shouldn't have homework anymore, you'll be like, well, why? Like, oh, so I can have free time. Well, why is free time important? And you sort of challenge them to justify it. You ultimately end up with a handful, and I mean like 5 to 8 impacts that are viable to use in a debate round because they are just, it's really easy to justify their importance. So that would be like the environment, that would be like war, that'd be poverty, um, a handful of other things, right? And so what debate really teaches you to do is, okay, I have this handful of issues that I care a lot about. When the topic comes up, what you're really doing in that 20 minutes is looking for the connection between this issue and the things that you care a lot about. So 20 minutes isn't a lot of time to learn about high speed trains. And what we do isn't like, okay, we're just going to learn everything that a train expert knows in 20 minutes. What we do is we read about and learn about and care about different issues like poverty. And then when a high-speed train comes up as the topic, what we're doing in that 20 minutes is, okay, how do high-speed trains interact with the environment? How do they interact with issues around poverty? How do they interact with issues around public health? And sometimes those links are really strong. Sometimes they are weaker, and you just look for the strongest link to a really important issue. So when I'm preparing a room full of students on a debate topic, it's not that I know everything about every issue that's going on in the world, or that we spend 20 minutes and we learn the layers and nuances very quickly. Mostly what we're doing is we've taught ourselves a lot about certain issues that we care about: poverty, public health, the environment. And we just look for ways of connecting that to this specific topic. And I think that's another like way of framing what you were saying before, which is that really the debaters find a few sets of issues that they care a lot about, and when they go out and they get all these topics, they're just different ways of talking about that same those same things. So if you really care about poverty, there's a lot of ways you can talk about that in debate. If
Yeah.
you really care about something else,
And I think that's such an important skill, because I've seen the most times when I see a failed argument are people, well-meaning people, who are talking at each other from their values, and those arguments will never be successful, because maybe you think if you loved me, or if you were a loving, kind person, you would see that this issue needs to be resolved this way because I'm coming from the values of, public health. But that person's coming from the value of, the environment or something else, and I see people end up leaving these arguments like, well, they're just like a hateful, ignorant person. No, you just weren't communicating to their values. You were communicating your values. And that is like a good, like, structural way to change your thinking.
See, and I think I use the same tactic, which is really funny when you're talking about it. I was like, I did not do that in debate. Was not catch on to that. But I think people know I'm a liberal. Like, people often try to get me into an argument about guns. And I do think that gun control is important. I don't think it's the most important issue. What I think the most important issue is mental health, right? And we talk about homelessness. We could talk about a lot of other things in this country. But if you look at what is really happening in this country is mental health, right? And it's that same thing. Right, I pull almost every argument back to, well, education. Why are middle schoolers killing themselves? Mental health. Why are we have so many people homeless? Why do we have a drug epidemic? Why do we have all of these things? This disconnection, these suicides in the military, so on and so forth, is that we're not taking care of mental health. And it's funny because as you were explaining that, I was like, oh my gosh, I've been doing that same thing. I probably subconsciously learned that in debate and just did not remember that I kept that all these years.
Well, I also got better at teaching. So when I was like, I probably didn't frame it that way. It's not, yeah. But yeah, I think that's 100% true. And I think it's also part of the reason why I don't debate people in my regular life. Like, I don't argue with people. I think I'll meet people and they'll be like, oh, you're a debate coach, you must really like to argue. And it's like, I don't. And it's for the exact reason you were saying, is most of what people think is debating is, well, I have this value and you have this value, and we're not going to talk about the values themselves. We're just going to like yell about some things that have to do with our own values and not listen to each other. And when I do have like a disagreement with somebody, or we're talking about politics or whatever, I'm really boring and unexciting to argue with, because I'm always like, okay, well, let's peel that back. Like, why?
Let's unpack
like,
that.
what's at the core of like, what is the value that like we're getting at, and like, why is that value important to you? And like, people will want to talk about one specific issue, like, so you're like, you think we should get rid of like assault weapons? And I'll be like, well, like, what is like, you're like, oh, like people say like assault rifle isn't a real term, but like, that doesn't matter. like who cares? We're talking about a much more important, more fundamental issue. And it's like you were saying, Jackie, that like if the issue you care about is mental health, then it springs up in a million different ways. I think a lot of people aren't conscious of what their core values are, or like why they're upset. They know this thing upsets them, but they're not conscious of why it's upsetting them. And they're not talking about really why it's upsetting them. And if they were, then the conversation would be a lot more productive. And it would also much more closely resemble therapy.
I was about to say, and you know why I can identify what I think is so important? Lots of therapy, lots of self work. And I think, Bex and I were talking about this the other day, like morals, and like, I'm not a religious person, so I've built my own morals, and I feel that I have to stick very strongly to them. I think it's self-reflection. And that's really like choosing how you want to share your voice. And I think that is something in debate. Like, I really learned, how do I want to be seen in the world? Not just what I want to be said, but like, what do I want people to see me as? So, okay, I think we are going to have to start to close this down because we are going to be one of our longer episodes. So thank you, because this has been
Sorry, I ramble.
fascinating. No, this was so good, and I think that's usually our longest episodes are kind of like the most interesting ones that are. One of our episodes was on the weather, and it's longer. It's been one of our more popular ones. I wouldn't have guessed the weather. I wouldn't have guessed the weather.
It's insane that we can even sort of predict it, and we're very good at it. Like, oh, it's gonna rain on Tuesday. How can you possibly know that?
Check out our weather episodes.
I will.
Yeah.
That's fascinating to me. This was a lot of fun. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's been great to see you. And shout out to I wrote it down, the Brooklyn Debate League. We're going to plug them.
Sure, yeah.
I love that. That's amazing.
If anyone's listening to this and they live in the New York area and they have a child and that child goes to a school that doesn't have, see, it just gets like, it's not even worth plugging to the point of how narrow and specific it is.
Great.
Like any Aquariuses in the suburban.
Give them money. That's, you were saying
that's really
what
smart.
They can do, right? Like,
I'm not good at my job. My job's not, I'm not the go get money person.
And I worked in politics, so I got you, Sasan.
There you go. Yes, donate to the Brooklyn Debate League.
We absolutely will. Thank you so much again for joining us. And then when Bex and I travel quite a bit, so when we find ourselves in New York next time, we'll
come visit.
Yeah, we'll all get in an argument. So.
Yeah, my the way I always put it into perspective is every time I was visiting New York before I lived here, people would be like, "Oh, you're in New York? Like, I'm in Connecticut. I'm in New Jersey. I'll come hang out." Every time I visited friends in Los Angeles, they'd say, "What part of Los Angeles are you in?" It's like, sorry, I can't make
West
it.
Side? That's another zip code. We don't go there.
So, yeah, New York's very easy to travel to. So I'd love to.
Well, we'll see if we can get Jackie on public trans.
Probably not. It's okay. And thank you everyone for joining us. We're going to go to be debate experts.
That was great. And that was the show. Thank you everyone for watching, and we hope you stay curious.
If you enjoyed this video, watch our other videos here on YouTube, or you should listen to the episode on We're Experts Now podcast. Bex, where can they find us?
You can find us wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and iHeartMusic.
And what if they want to talk to us?
If you have ideas for something you want us to investigate, send us an email at we'reexpertspod@gmail.com. That's wereexpertspod@gmail.com.
Great job on that spelling. Ooh. A+. Do you do this professionally?
I believe we're both doing it professionally right now.
Wow. People should know about this.
I completely agree, and you can find us on Instagram at We're Experts Now Pod.
Thanks again, and if you enjoy the show, subscribe and comment, and do not forget to leave a 5-star tip.
That's a great idea. Are you a podcast expert?
I think we both are. I think
we're experts now.
This has been a Just Being Better Media production.